Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts in this space together be holy and acceptable to you, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So for years, artfully and mysteriously crafted and comprised postcards arrived at an unassuming mailbox on Copper Ridge Road in Germantown, Maryland, just miles from here. They were responses to an invitation. You are invited to anonymously contribute a secret to a group art project. Your secret can be a regret, fear, betrayal, desire, confession, or childhood humiliation. Reveal anything as long as it is true and you have never shared it with anyone before. Be brief, be legible, be creative. The invitation was first extended by Frank Warren, who had a vision for a community art project. He began printing 4,000 self-addressed blank postcards to distribute. Today, the blog site that curates submissions has had over 825 million lifetime hits. Each week, a curated selection of postcards received are featured on the blog. The secrets submitted run the gamut: affairs, abortions, covetous thoughts, petty crimes, secret addictions, unrevealed diagnoses, fears. Not all secrets are what we would judge as bad per se, but they've been held closely, unrevealed by the person, not exposed to the light, and even now, only anonymously. Nearly 1 billion hits, and a robust Twitter following, several TED Talks. People are fascinated by these revelations. When the project first began, Warren was lucky to receive enough postcards to share 10 viable secrets each week. The most recent estimate that I can find suggests that the project now receives more than 200 a day, nearly 16 years later, which must make the decision of which 10 to curate each week a very hard one. The sheer volume of responses since 2004 reveals how deeply we want to be able to name our hardest, darkest thing and how we want to expose it somehow to the light, and to still be okay. Today we begin our journey on the path of being a disciple of Jesus Christ right here. A disciple is a person who experiences the forgiveness and acceptance of God. That is our starting point. So let's begin within that in an easy place, if you will. Let's begin with acceptance. We'll look more deeply at forgiveness next week because the two go hand in hand. Today's text from the Gospel of Matthew does not actually show up in our lectionary, which is the 3-year cycle of readings that are used by a lot of Protestant churches. And I won't spend a lot of time speculating, but I do think it's because it's actually really hard. And it addresses something that even today is kind of a taboo subject. It is rooted in patriarchy and rules about who's in and who's out that we are often unwilling to revisit even today. And it is possible that it opens the door to the wideness of God's grace. And that makes some of us really uncomfortable. Some of us actually prefer for God's grace to not be quite so wide. In the story, the scribes and the Pharisees have shown up with a woman caught in the very act of committing adultery. That has a specific connotation in society today, but let's not forget that a woman once married in this ancient society was considered adulterous, even for having a relationship with another man once she was widowed, or if her rightful husband abandoned her. And without a man, a woman had little ability to survive in these ancient economies. Throughout John's Gospel, the Jewish authorities seem pretty set on catching Jesus in tricky conundrums. This one seems pretty cut and dried. She committed adultery. We caught her in the act. The law says we can stone her. What do you say, Jesus? And Jesus bends down and begins writing in the dirt. Our modern text translations don't say much more than that. He wrote with his finger on the ground. But another ancient version of this text adds a few words. And once again, he bent down and wrote on the ground the sins of each of them. Or, from my mentor and theologian colleague Rob Bell, another possibility lies in the chapter that precedes this. Jesus has been teaching about living water during the Festival of the Tabernacles, where the Jewish authorities would have also been present and teaching to crowds. And certain festivals focused on certain texts, and during the Festival of the Tabernacle, the text of Jeremiah 17 was taught. And specifically at verse 13 and 14, which read this way: O hope of Israel, O Lord, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be recorded in the underworld, for they have forsaken the fountain of living water, the Lord. Heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved, for you are my praise. Or, in more common Hebrew translation, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away will be recorded in the dust. Heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved. So as the authorities are waiting to see how Jesus might judge this woman, he instead begins writing perhaps their names in the dirt, the names of the very authorities who are trying to catch him up in some sort of blasphemy. Jesus not only doesn't condemn the woman brought to him, but he sees the brokenness of all of those who bring charges against her as well. And really the end result is that no one gets stoned. No one throws stones. He assures the woman that he does not condemn her, and he sends her away, telling her not to sin again. And then in a scene change, Jesus is gathered with the disciples, sort of debriefing the last several key events. I am the light of the world, he says. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. We know that light dispels darkness, that light makes things visible. Light facilitates seeing. In Jesus' light, we are fully seen. And when we're willing to look with Jesus' eyes, we see in full light the others around us. Light dispels our deepest secrets somehow. Light dispels shame. The sociologist Brené Brown reminds us that shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. She teaches us that shame keeps us from living fully into our abilities, our relationships, our gifts. She teaches that shame causes us to wear masks that not only hide our flaws, but instead they project some perfection for others to see in us. In the 4 or 5 years that I've been reading her work, I can't help but hear the results of her years of qualitative research and gathered information from a wild array of people and situations, and hear some of the truth of the gospel. You are worthy of being seen. God's love is bigger than your worst day. God's love is for us no matter what. God who creates us also sees us fully. Our bumps and our bruises, our warts and our scars and our deceptions, even the things that we can't actually see for ourselves sometimes. All of that being seen actually matters to our well-being and our wholeness. And it has to do with the well-being and the wholeness of our society. Maybe folks who cannot receive that from the scriptures can actually receive it from a scientist who is doing really well-respected work. Our willingness to lay aside our shame and expose our flaws, not necessarily to the whole world, but certainly to the God who loves us and then live differently because we know we won't get stoned actually changes us and the way that we move in the world. And when our way of moving in the world is changed, so is the whole world. We are on this journey where we're seeking a place that we belong, ways of becoming closer to God and one another, ways of believing in the power of God at work in the world right here and right now, so that we can actually be part of that work. Part of the journey for us must be letting ourselves be seen. Part of the journey for us must be knowing that God sees us fully and accepts us. Part of the journey for us must be knowing that the God who sees us fully loves us fully too. Light dispels darkness. Light makes things visible. Light facilitates seeing. In Jesus' light, we are fully seen. And when we are willing to look one another in the eyes with the eyes of Jesus, we see one another in full light. That has to make the journey richer. That has to change us. It has to change the world. May it be so. Amen. Today, we're going to take about 5 minutes now for silent reflection together. And during this reflection, you're invited to see deeply and reflect on what it means to really be seen. Listen deeply. Listen for the sounds around you, but also listen for how God is touching your heart. Let's take a deep breath and enter into a quiet space of reflection and see where our hearts are led.